Bonjour. Hello. Bienvenue à l'Assemblée publique annuelle de la Banque de l'infrastructure du Canada. Je m'appelle Frédéric Duguay. Je suis l'avocat général et le secrétaire de la Société et je serai votre animateur de cérémonie aujourd'hui. En tant que société d'État, nous comprenons que cette Assemblée publique annuelle est importante pour l'ensemble des Canadiens et Canadiennes. Cet événement est une initiative de responsabilisation que nous prenons très au sérieux. L'Assemblée est également accessible dans les 2 langues officielles. Nous vous remercions de vous être joints à nous aujourd'hui. Welcome to the CIB's annual public meeting. My name is Frédéric Duguay. I'm the CIB's General Counsel and Corporate Secretary, and I will be your MC today. As a Crown Corporation, we understand that this annual public meeting is important for all Canadians. This event is an accountability initiative that we take very seriously. It is also available in both official languages. We thank you very much for joining us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land we are hosting today's meeting from is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also recognize that other participants on today's call are joining us from other territories, and we respect and acknowledge their lands and their people. Today's session will proceed as follows. We will have remarks by the Chair of our Board, Tamara Vrooman, followed by a presentation by our Chief Executive Officer, Ehren Cory. He will cover the accomplishments of the CIB over the past year and talk about what lies ahead for the CIB for the future. This presentation will be followed by a question and answer session that is available to all participants today. We also invited all attendees that registered as of Thursday, June 8, to submit any questions in advance. Thank you to all of those who took the time to submit questions in advance. Cette séance durera 60 minutes. L'Assemblée est présentée en anglais et en français. Si vous préférez participer dans l'autre langue, vous pouvez visiter le site cib-bic2023.com et cliquer sur le bouton pour rejoindre la diffusion continue dans la langue de votre choix. This session will last 60 minutes. The meeting is presented in English and French. If you prefer to participate in the other language, please visit cib-bic2023.com and choose the button to join the stream in the language of your choice. For your awareness, today's session is also being recorded. If you are joining us via webcast and would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box on your screen to type and submit your questions. If we have any members of the press joining us today, we welcome you to address your questions directly to the CIB's media team at media@cib-bic.ca. Now, let's proceed. To share more information on the accomplishments of the past year, please welcome the Chair of our Board, Tamara Vrooman. Tamara.
Thanks very much, Frédéric. Bonjour à tous. Nous sommes heureux d'avoir l'occasion d'organiser cette forum public chaque année, afin de fournir à nos parties prenantes une mise à jour de nos progrès et de vous permettre de poser des questions au conseil d'administration ou à Ehren et à son équipe. Good afternoon. We welcome the opportunity to hold this public forum each year, providing our stakeholders with an upgrade on our progress and creating an opportunity for you to ask questions that you have of the board or of management and the team. My name is Tamara Vrooman. I'm the chair of the board of directors of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and I'm coming to you from Vancouver, in the Vancouver International Airport, where my office is located. Vancouver International Airport, or YVR, is located on the traditional, unceded, and continuously occupied territory of the Musqueam, and I'd like to take an opportunity to pay my respects to elders past and present. As the Canada Infrastructure Bank moves past its 5th year of operation, it is an opportunity to reflect on the incredible journey that we have been on to get more infrastructure built. We all know that infrastructure is critical to our well-being and prosperity. It connects us to communities, powers our homes and businesses, and moves the information and goods that we depend on each and every day. The CIB was established as an innovative financing tool to work with the public sector and private and institutional investors to grow and accelerate the pace of infrastructure development across our country. It was a new approach to a long-standing challenge. And today, the results are clear. We established a team of experts and built a presence across this nation. We are incredibly proud to be reaching the key milestone of $10 billion in investment commitments. Together with a growing list of private and public sector partners, we have combined our total capital invested to $27 billion, representing 46 projects from coast to coast to coast. Behind these headline numbers is the story of the continued maturation of the CIB. The board is pleased to see management advancing key initiatives that address, among other things, enterprise risk, streaming of investment review processes, and an enhanced focus on sustainability. In the last fiscal year, the management team sharpened its focus on enterprise risk management on a number of fronts. Led by a new senior leader with responsibility for implementing ERM across the organization, we're focused on identifying, assessing, mitigating, and monitoring risks that may present both threats and opportunities when it comes to meeting our objectives. Through the ERM program, management tracks potential issues on a risk register and provides quarterly enterprise dashboard results to the Impact and Risk Committee of our Board of Directors. These include reporting on the CIB's top and emerging risks, performance against risk appetite, and key risk indicators. We're in the process of building a strong risk culture with the goal of addressing and mitigating potential challenges early and efficiently to support informed, risk-based decision-making. One of the board's key responsibilities is oversight of investment activity. This year, we worked with management to further streamline the review process. To do this, we conducted reviews of 43 investments, including preliminary investment proposals, backstop commitments, and final investment commitments. We received regular updates on CIB's response to managing any exposure due to increased fiscal impacts in projects. And we reviewed and recommended adjustments to the investment policy to update the decision-making process for previously approved investment commitments. Turning to the organization's commitment to sustainability, we believe it's at the core of what we do. Our investments reduce greenhouse gas emissions, connect Canadians through broadband and transit, grow our economy through trade, and close the Indigenous infrastructure gap. With respect to climate, this means deploying significant capital towards projects that help reduce GHGs and support the federal government in its efforts to reach its climate goals. The bulk of what we do is through investments, but we understand we need to keep our own house in order too. We have advanced our efforts this year by calculating our own carbon footprint and issuing our first climate-related disclosures. Moving forward, we will build on this foundation by including financed emissions in our profile and enhancing our climate-related disclosures. We understand that infrastructure plays a crucial role in building the sustainable future we want and contributes to our transition to a net zero economy. We're at the beginning of an important sustainability journey for the CIB. We're proud of our contributions and results so far, but we have significantly more to do. We're excited where we're going. This past year saw the release of our Sustainability and Impact Report, which can be found on our website. Going forward, we'll integrate our sustainability reporting into our annual report document. Turning to our relationship with the Government of Canada, as a federal Crown corporation, we continue to engage directly with Infrastructure Canada Minister Dominic LeBlanc, Deputy Minister Kelly Gillis, and their teams. In addition to regular tables at which we discuss investments, communications, research, and corporate reports, a 5-year review of the CIB, as required by our legislation, was initiated in June of 2022. The Minister undertakes a review of the legislative provisions and operations of the CIB Act every 5 years. The legislative review is meant to assess whether the policy premises and context that underpin the creation of the CIB are still sound and relevant, whether the CIB's legislated mandate and authorities to support its operations remain relevant in the context of an evolving policy and infrastructure landscape, and whether changes or clarifications are needed to position the CIB going forward. The CIB provided input into this exercise in response to an open consultation undertaken by Infrastructure Canada. We have been informed that the Minister intends to table a report on the review in Parliament this month. We welcome the report and the opportunity to continue working with Infrastructure Canada and our many stakeholders to advance our important mission. I would like to close today by thanking our Board of Directors. This is a board with deep knowledge of Canada's infrastructure landscape, as well as governance and financial expertise. I'd like to once again thank 2 departing board members, James Cherry and Chris Hickman, who both joined the board back in 2017. Both Jim and Chris made significant contributions and brought regional perspectives from Quebec and the Maritimes that were highly valued. We also welcome 2 new board appointments, André-Lise Metteau and Michael Bernstein, who were appointed on December 2nd, 2022. And they've already demonstrated a strong acumen for infrastructure investment on our board. With that, I'd like to congratulate Ehren and his team for their exceptional progress at this 5-year mark. I will now turn the microphone/screen over to Ehren to provide his update. Thank you again for the opportunity to address you today, and I now turn it over to our Chief Operating Officer, Ehren Cory. Ehren, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Merci, Tamara. Et bonjour à toutes et à tous, des personnes qui nous rejoignent aujourd'hui, venues de tous les coins du pays. Nous vous remercions de l'intérêt que vous portez à la BIC. Thank you for your interest in the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Thank you for joining us today from coast to coast to coast. As Tamara indicated, I'm here and pleased to be here representing our entire organization, and I really look forward to the opportunity today to discuss our progress and where we're headed and to field your questions. I'm going to start with a review of our progress and highlights from the past year. We have continued to invest in critical infrastructure projects across the country. So, some quick stats first, as you can see on your screens, hopefully. In this past year, we made investment commitments to 22 projects with more than $3 billion in financing. We reached financial close on 25 projects, which represented over $4.5 billion in committed loans. As of today, we have 29 projects in active construction, and we had our first project reach completion, our investment with Edmonton in zero-emission buses, with the full complement of 20 buses purchased and on the road. So we have reached the other end of an investment in 22-23 for the first time. The picture on the screen shows a ribbon cutting. Ribbon cuttings happen at the very start of infrastructure projects. This is with our partners Dream, where we're working on an energy retrofit. And I mentioned this picture happened earlier this year, and as of today, the program they're working on is a retrofit of 19 buildings across the country. 13 of those buildings are currently in construction, being renovated, being converted to net zero ready buildings with significant benefits for climate, for livability, and for our cities. So our projects really are making the move from investment commitment into construction and active operation quickly. Now, let's look a bit more at the cumulative effect of those investments. If that's the past 12 months, you will have seen during Tamara's comments the map with a lot of red dots on the left-hand side of your screen. This does represent the 46 individual investment commitments we have made since inception. And those represent real projects with real partners across this country. They also represent real impact. And the right-hand side of this slide speaks to those benefits. Given our mandate as an investor in public good and infrastructure that delivers public benefits, we take these numbers extremely seriously, and you will have seen in our previous annual reports and in our corporate planning as we look forward, we set targets for ourselves not only on capital deployment, but on benefits and impact. So we measure things like the annual GHG impact of the investments we make in clean power and green energy. Currently, we estimate that the investments we have already made will deliver 5.1 million tons of annual GHG reduction. We measure transit ridership and the way we are accelerating the move to common transit systems, which are better for the economy and for livability of cities. Right now, we estimate we've invested in projects that deliver about 175,000 daily new trips. We've invested in agricultural projects which increase land productivity and GDP. We've invested in 27 Indigenous communities across this country who are directly benefiting from our investments in water and wastewater, green energy, clean power, transit and transportation systems. And we've connected nearly 350,000 households to broadband who did not previously have access across the country through our partnership, both with the federal government, with ISED, and with our many ISPs, broadband delivery partners across the country. Those impacts are as important or more than talking about the number of projects. When we talk about the value of impact, we really do take that seriously. I mentioned this earlier, but each of those dots represent real partnerships, and that's what I'd like to speak about now, if I may. All of our work, whether it's to drive reduction in the GHG emissions of our transit systems by working with municipalities, driving building energy retrofits in partnership with building owners, working with power developers, public utilities, private power companies. All of those projects are aimed to both drive prosperity and competitiveness of Canada and deliver on moving us towards a net zero world. And all of them happen in partnership. The pictures on your screen are the most important thing to remember. Every one of those are posed pictures, and I get the privilege of being in them. They're the result of the work of an incredible team and the result of months, sometimes years, of collaboration, negotiation, and partnership. These represent from the picture on the right, which is with the Grasswoods Reserve. This is a water treatment facility and enabling infrastructure to allow for urban reserve development just south of Saskatoon. It's a project the CIB invested about $30 million in, and it will grow a community. On the left-hand side of your screen, we're standing in a field outside Darlington where we're celebrating the investment of the CIB, along with our partners in the Ontario government, the federal government, and OPG, in the new nuclear reactor, which will provide new clean power for another generation, in fact, generations to come in Ontario. The pictures in between represent two of our other many partnerships with the City of Calgary and the University of Toronto. I give you those examples only to highlight the real and richness of the partnerships we're building with municipal leaders, public sector leaders, Indigenous leaders, and private companies across this nation. Now, our mandate has continued to expand and grow, and Tamara talked about some of the steps that we have taken as an organization and that the board has taken to continue to mature our organization. It's also worth just reflecting on how our mandate has continued to shape and evolve. A year ago, when we conducted this meeting, we talked about how Budget 2022, in the spring of 2022, expanded our mandate in some important ways, clarifying the role for the CIB in clean fuel, hydrogen, carbon capture, and small modular reactor investments across the country. Since then, we have responded quickly and definitively with making investments in a number of those areas. We have now made investments in our first electric vehicle charging network with our partners at Flow. We made an investment in our first biofuel facility at Varennes with Enerchem and a series of partners in a facility that will deliver a biofuel product and replace a fossil fuel. And we have, of course, as I mentioned previously, made our first investment in a small modular nuclear reactor. All of those are examples of us taking the mandate and the challenge given us, working really closely with our partners in the private sector and importantly with the rest of the federal government to determine how best to implement the direction of the budget and turn it into real action in projects. We're taking the same tack now to Budget 2023. And the most recent budget had a number of additional areas of focus and new areas for the CIB. There's the biggest conclusion, of course, from this year's budget is the even greater focus around the CIB's role in accelerating energy transition and the path to net zero. The CIB was given long-term targets from the Government of Canada to invest up to $10 billion of our money in both the clean power and green infrastructure spaces, and to take more aggressive stances in doing so across the country. There was also a clear direction around supporting Indigenous communities in participating in the economic benefits of their projects through equity participation in projects where the CIB is an investor. And this is a new tool that allows us to bring more projects to completion more quickly and in participation with Indigenous partners. We are also making progress in another area. Wasn't particularly specifically highlighted in the budget, but it's another example around critical mineral strategy. And the Government of Canada has a clear priority around critical minerals. And this is actually an interesting example where it's not a new mandate for the CIB. In fact, what we'll be doing is investing in roads, in power, clean power, in broadband connectivity, in wastewater treatment. So all forms of infrastructure that we invest in, but doing it and packaged in unique ways to support the development of this critical sector for the country. So this is another example where we are quickly aligning our resources, skills, and partnerships to deliver on national priorities. I want to talk about our financial results for a moment, an important part of any annual public meeting. So as I mentioned, we had 25 projects this year advanced to financial close. Those total $4.6 billion. Those are firm investment commitments. We have signed a lending agreement. There's a credit agreement behind those, and money will flow behind them. As you can see, life to date, our funding is about $1.7 billion of actual cash that flowed, $261 million in the most recent year. As projects advance, as the construction that I described continues to accelerate, the dollars of funding will continue to grow in proportion. We have appropriations, of course, of $4.5 billion, which match the financial closes we reach. That's the money that we now have committed to those projects and under contract, if you will. We realized $29.7 million of interest income, which represents projects that are now well into their life and are realizing interest back to the CIB. And as you can see, our operating expenses totaled $46 million for the year. And it is worth just reflecting on what that means if you compare that to whether the total assets under management, which are, as Tamara mentioned, approaching $10 billion, or if you compared it to the annual activity of investment of $4.6 billion, it's actually a convenient number. You can do the math quite clearly. That represents 1% of annual activity. It represents less than 0.5% of our cumulative investment activity. This is, by benchmark, a very lean organization, one we're proud of and continuing to invest in and grow, but where we take the treatment of taxpayer dollars really seriously, and every dollar our goal is to maximize the new infrastructure we're getting built. I talked earlier about partnerships and their importance to us. I'd like to just reflect a bit more on the increasing role the CIB has been playing in engaging with stakeholders in the market at large, not only in partnerships on individual projects, but on trying to move sectors and regions of the country forward. With the relaxing of travel restrictions and our ability to be more out in the world, it has given us the opportunity to, I think, engage in new ways with our stakeholders. We have spent time touring the country. We've spent regional meetings in Vancouver, Montreal, Edmonton, and Calgary, and more recently, but in this current year, in Saskatchewan. Last week I was in Saskatchewan for a week. In each of those places, we're taking the opportunity to meet with private sector, potential infrastructure investors, with governments, both municipal and regional, with key stakeholders like Chambers of Commerce, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Canada Green Building Council, with many partners, with Indigenous leaders and Indigenous partners, all in the name of better understanding infrastructure needs across the country, helping to explain and clarify the role of the CIB and how we can help accelerate. As you can see from the pictures on this screen, including one of Tamara and I, not two faces on a screen, but actually two human beings standing beside each other. We had the chance last year at this time to meet with Chief Sparrow from the Musqueam when we were in Vancouver, and a chance to learn from and hear from leaders in the Indigenous community, in the business community, and in governments across this country has really helped sharpen our focus, and I think helped to build an awareness, understanding of the role of the CIB as well. Those will lead to partnerships and projects down the road. We've also been investing more than ever in our knowledge and research activities, and I think it's important to point out a few recent examples of that. We have done work in 22-23, a few important research projects that we released. One was around the green retrofit economy. We did that in partnership with Delphi and the Building Council. We also did a project with TMU around how to secure critical infrastructure from cyber threats, an increasing challenge in many of the projects we invest in. I'd also point out some research that was published in April, but was heavily invested in and completed during the course of 22-23, and that was in partnership with U of T around land value capture and the role that it can play in accelerating our transit investments. All of these are examples of how our research can help lead to unlocking new sectors of infrastructure investment across the country. Finally, I'd like to just mention, as it says on the slide, we created a really innovative, I think, partnership with the AFOA, and this is around building Indigenous capacity in the financial sector and project management sector. So it's a certification program where we're partnering with TD Bank and the AFOA to deliver a mini certification to financial officers, economic development leaders in the Indigenous communities so that they have the capabilities and resources to lead projects in their communities. Okay, I'd like to end with a little note about our team. Tamara showed the pictures of our board members, and they really do represent incredible expertise, representation from across our country, from different pieces of the infrastructure landscape, transit and energy and broadband and transportation and trade, and we are privileged to have them. I cannot show you pictures of all of our employees, and that's because we've continued to grow as an organization. I'm really proud to. You can see a picture of a few of them on your screen now. The CIB today is about 120 people. We come from incredible range of backgrounds, most from the private sector, but some importantly with public sector experience as well. We really are trying to live a vision of making Canada better, a more prosperous, competitive, clean country, breaking new ground while we do it, being innovative and being willing to try new things, bringing the best of public and private, and celebrating and learning from our differences. Those are the part of the core values that we as an organization have adopted. This picture of employees at a table was actually talking about those values and how best to phrase and encapsulate them that captures the spirit of the CIB. We have a workforce, as I said, that comes from a range of places, but what draws them here is the mission of the CIB, the idea that we can invest in building this country to be prosperous, competitive, and successful in the transition towards net zero, that we can invest in connecting every Canadian, making sure we have access to the infrastructure that leads to great quality of life and great economic health and social health. That's what draws the many CIB employees together. I know that's what motivates our board members to join and be parts of our board as well. I want to say thanks to all employees. I'm sure some are listening today and say we would be nowhere without the hard work, dedication, and effort of our employee group, and a big thank you for that. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, for joining us today. Merci tout le monde. We're looking forward to your questions.
Merci, Ehren. Now, let's begin our question and answer session. First, we will address questions that were submitted in advance for Ehren and Tamara's comments. And our first question really deals with project origination. And the question is, does the CIB proactively advance infrastructure projects, or do they generally come from project proponents? Donc, en français, la question par rapport à la réception de projets à la banque, est-ce que la banque a une approche proactive pour développer des projets avec des partenaires puis des promoteurs de projets, ou est-ce que la plupart des projets sont reçus par rapport à des propositions d'investissement par les promoteurs?
Thank you, Frederick, and thank you for the question. And it's a really important one. And Tamara may have something to add in a moment, but let me start. The answer is yes and yes. Given the emphasis on partnerships that I had in my comments, it wouldn't be a surprise to hear me say the following. Part of our job is absolutely to be engaging with entrepreneurs, large companies in Canada, governments at all levels, to understand their infrastructure needs and to try and creatively structure blended finance solutions to meet their challenges. So absolutely, there's a part of our role which is to receive the priorities and then creatively structure and solve those problems to close infrastructure gaps. And given the role that municipalities, provinces, Indigenous leaders, and private companies all play in delivering the infrastructure we need, it should come as no surprise that they have a lot of the ideas themselves of what needs to be built. And to say we have an infrastructure gap in the country is a somewhat vague concept. To turn that into action requires the on-the-ground understanding of priorities at a regional and sectoral level. At the same time, it is absolutely, we think, the role of the CIB to constantly be looking ahead, looking out a little further in the horizon at where the big infrastructure needs are and will be. Our research is a great example of that. Us trying to take an earlier view of what it's going to take to unstick even more transit in our country, what it's going to take to really grow our trade capacity and de-bottleneck trade, not with individual investments but rather by looking across the whole system. These are ways that I think the CIB also can and is playing a more proactive role in thinking about our needs. Now, I think what happens is that's a journey. And that's a journey where we do have to even then do it in partnership by bringing in relevant industry stakeholders, by bringing in the likely owners of projects down the road. But that sort of proactive looking out is something that I think we will continue to do even more of in the years ahead. Tamara, anything you'd want to add to this important question?
No, the only thing I would add is that we also have put staff in market in the regions to make sure that, we understand what the needs are of infrastructure owners in those markets, as well as ensure that the presence of the bank is known in those markets. So while we absolutely are open to receiving requests from wherever they may come, we're also in market actively sourcing those and looking to the future, as you talked about.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be remiss. Thank you for the reminder. We have opened our location in Calgary in this past year. We have continued with a really strong local market presence in Montreal. So the CIB has offices in Toronto, Montreal, and Calgary. And we have presence across the country. We have project development staff who are covering all of the regions of the country. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Tamara.
As we proceed with the Q&A, and as I said earlier, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Ehren and Tamara, please use the Q&A box that you have on your web page for this webinar. Si vous avez des questions, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la boîte respective pour les questions sur votre webinaire. Puis je vais maintenant enchaîner avec la deuxième question. Our second question really relates to the breadth of our investments, and during Tamara's earlier remarks, we talked about having 46 partnerships to date. But when we talk about investing in projects across Canada, can you talk about areas where thus far we may have seen less activity, like, for example, in northern communities or in the Maritimes?
Of course. Thank you. As I stated and as we showed in our map, we are active and present with real investments in all regions of the country. That said, I think that I appreciate the question. There's a lot going on. I'll talk about the Maritimes maybe first, then I'll turn my attention to the north. A lot of infrastructure development happening in the East Coast. It's around certainly cleaning the electricity grid. So we're working really closely with partners on large-scale projects like the potential for regional transmission in Eastern Canada, often referred to as the Atlantic Loop. It's a great example of the CIB playing its role before there's an actual transaction around more of an advisory approach around what are the options available. And I think that's a really clear example of a high-impact mega project in Eastern Canada that we're working very closely on. There are a number of others, as people would know, around energy transition, both clean electricity, but also the potential for energy export. So we're working really closely with project developers and governments in Eastern Canada around those as well. In the north, I think this is a critically important question, and one that when I'm here next year talking about research we've conducted, I think a place we'll have done even more, because there is so much change happening in northern Canada around long-term infrastructure needs. When you think of the Northwest Passage opening in 15 years, which is often the stat that's quoted to me when I speak to colleagues and leaders in the north, and how is that going to affect trade flows? How does the growth in critical minerals needs affect northern infrastructure needs? From a shipping, port, critical mining perspective, there are really fundamental changes happening in the infrastructure needs of the North. And I think the first thing we need to do, including, in addition to continuing to work on the projects we are today with, and we are working with all three territorial governments, and especially in the electricity sector in those markets. But as we look ahead, I think what's going to be really important is to work in partnership with those leaders to really flesh out what are the 10 to 20 year horizon infrastructure needs of the North, and how do we invest to achieve that. I think this is going to be really important work for the bank in the year ahead.
Proceeding with the questions that we received in advance of the meeting, the next one deals with the legislative review. The Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Infrastructure and Communities is currently undergoing the CIB's first 5-year legislative review. There have been suggestions that the CIB should be transformed to provide low-cost public loans to municipalities and Indigenous communities and support environmentally sustainable projects. Could you please respond?
Sure, and Tamara, maybe I'll let you start given you spoke about the legislative review, and then I'm happy to build.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks very much for that question. We certainly have, pardon me, heard a lot through the consultative process from stakeholders from coast to coast to coast. And I want to begin by thanking all of you for your interest in the bank and sharing your perspectives with the minister and with us. We've heard of the need to ensure that the bank is targeting our financing to areas that have the biggest gaps and the most needs to get things done. And certainly Indigenous and municipalities and municipal owners, including small municipalities, are ones where there's a significant need, and historically where funding may not have flowed in quite the right proportion. So as Ehren said, we are actively working with owners of infrastructure across the country and ensuring that our toolkit is flexible enough to address the infrastructure needs that are there, while pointing out to the federal government and to other parties where we think others may be better suited to provide the kind of financing and funding support in partnership with us. And so it's very much on our horizon. I don't think that we expect that to be the sole focus of the bank going forward, but certainly the needs of smaller municipalities, the needs of Indigenous communities and rural communities in the North, as well as the need to support the transition to a greener and cleaner economy is certainly at the forefront of the focus of the bank to date, and I expect it will continue into the future.
Thanks. I would just emphasize your last point, Tamara. The premise of the question I'm very comfortable with. It's just that there's an or in the question, meaning that we have to choose one or the other. I think the reality is that the infrastructure needs of our country dictate that there are absolutely places where we should be working with municipalities and Indigenous communities in particular to deliver on their clean energy, broadband, water and wastewater, transportation goals. And there are other sectors and spaces in the economy. For instance, I think of our investment in electric vehicle charging infrastructure or in the Varennes biofuels plant, where the natural partner for those projects, which are still absolutely about accelerating our transition and doing it in ways that are economically sustainable, but where the partner to those, the natural partners, are more private sector players, entrepreneurs, small and large, with great technology and a vision for building infrastructure. So the only part that I take issue with is that I think, and it's of course the prerogative of the legislative review, I don't answer for that part, but from the CIB's perspective, we think it's a yes and kind of answer, not a either or opportunity.
Thank you, Ehren. We received 2 terrific questions as part of the Q&A. And they pertain more specifically on budget 2023. And I think, so I'll read both of them because they're somewhat linked. So the first one would be, can you tell us more how the CIB will assess opportunities for Indigenous communities to participate as equity partners in clean energy projects? And also, can you tell us more how the CIB will assess opportunities for Indigenous communities to participate? Actually, it's a repeat of the same question, but it's a really important one. That's why I repeated it twice.
Excellent. Thank you. It is an important one, and you can repeat it as many times as you think for emphasis. I think first of all, we're early days still, and I was talking in my comments about how quickly we moved from an announcement in a budget through to an investment over the 12 months of the year when budget 2022 landed until late in the year when we made an investment. So similarly, I want to just temper my comments by saying we are very much right now in the process of trying to round out what the terms, conditions, shape of our Indigenous equity program would look like. And we're doing that talking to potential partners and borrowers. We're doing that, of course, in consultation with the Department of Infrastructure and the Government of Canada. So I give that caveat just to say a bit of my answer is we will continue to roll out in the months ahead much clearer guidelines about quantum and terms and how we do that. But I can lay out today a few principles of how we're approaching it, which I think gets to the heart of the question. First of all, I just noting that we're talking about adding this as an option across projects that the CIB would be investing in. So that means across the 5 sectors that the CIB invests in. The question was focused on clean power, I know. But we're actually, our general principle is if it's a project that's in one of the CIB's 5 sectors and it's naturally therefore a fit for the CIB, we have the opportunity to think about and look at Indigenous equity lending. It is certainly not a solution for every project or for every community, but it is a way to help solve what has been a long-standing problem in some sectors of our economy where there's a clear agreement on the need for a seat at the table and an ownership stake and a seat at the financial table in these projects, and there hasn't been an easy mechanism to doing so. So the way we envision it working is in a project, I'll use the example of the question, in a clean power project where the CIB might be investing. If there's an Indigenous community that is involved in the project, is looking to have an ownership stake in the project, we would work with them to lend. We would not be lending them 100% of the money, so they would have to be providing some of their own funds as well. That's part of how we partner with everyone, that there's a shared sense of skin in the game and shared incentive for success. So we would be co-investing with them. We would be doing so in a way that ensures that the community receives some of the economic benefit of the project. So what I mean by that is if the rate of return on the project is 7%, we wouldn't lend the money at 7%. That defeats the purpose. There would be some differential that would allow them to benefit on a cash flow basis from the project. And we would structure those in each project to meet the needs of the project and meet the needs of the community. I think those are the basic principles of how we're proceeding, and we look forward to sharing more and, most importantly, to starting to make real investments using this new tool in our toolkit.
J'aimerais procéder à la prochaine question par rapport à la rénovation énergétique des bâtiments. So this question, I'll read it in English. The CIB has recently committed $100 million to smaller and medium-sized building owners to lower their environmental footprints with low-carbon retrofits. Incredibly important development. When is this program rolling out, and is this funding annual or slated for renewal if fully utilized?
Excellent question. Thank you very much. So our Building Retrofits Initiative, just to start, I'll step back. The questioner clearly understands us well, but maybe just for context. One of our 5 sectors of investment, of course, green infrastructure. It covers a number of classes. One of those is the building retrofit space. As we know, about 1/5 of emissions in Canada come from our buildings. Addressing those is an incredibly tricky thing. It is guerrilla warfare across the millions of buildings in our country. Finding new models to finance that, leveraging the savings that will come from the projects is really critical. Building retrofits ultimately have payback because they lead to energy efficiency and electricity savings as well as climate benefits. However, they have high upfront costs and they have uncertain payback and sometimes quite long payback periods. That is the problem we're trying to solve, and that's what we've structured. When we started the program 2 years ago, 2 and a bit, we had 2 basic approaches. One was to lend to large building owners who could conduct a retrofit program across their properties. I mentioned DREAM in my slides in our ribbon-cutting picture, and we've worked with other partners like Avenue Living, who own a portfolio of rental buildings across Western Canada, to retrofit, I believe in their case, more than 100 of their buildings to drive energy efficiency. We also, at the same time, identified this second pathway, though, which was around what we call aggregators. And this is service companies who might provide energy services where they would come in and retrofit your building, share in the savings that come from that retrofit, and use that to pay for the upfront cost. Some people call that energy as a service or net zero as a service. It's this concept of doing energy retrofits, and you could find many, and we have had great success finding partnerships in that space with leading companies from the energy services market, leading companies from the building services market across the country. What that has done has opened our eyes to the part of the market that is not fully addressed just yet by those first two prongs, which is around, as you say, as the questioner properly says, Frederick, how do you get to smaller and medium-sized commercial buildings, industrial buildings in our country? And so this idea of partnering with financial institutions to reach their borrowers at critical moments, think mortgage renewal or building life extension. There are moments where building owners are naturally going through a process, and we would love to be able to help incentivize them to make energy retrofits. That's what the program's designed to do. The first of them is being rolled out as we speak. We expect to do more. It's an open thing that we would do a number of partnerships like that. I use financial institutions. They're a great example of how we can do this and leverage at scale to get to a lot of small and medium-sized building owners, industrial and commercial building owners in the country. So the answer is, first is rolling out now, and we look forward to doing more of those deals. The last part of the question, really interesting. The plan, the idea behind these is for it to be a short duration loan. The idea is to help get over the critical challenge, which is in the upfront investment of capital, and to provide a risk-sharing tool where the CIB can help share in getting those projects done on cost and on budget, and having them prove out the energy savings that they purport to have. And once they do, they actually pay for themselves. So then the CIB would exit quite quickly. And to answer the questioner, our intention is then for that money to go into the next energy retrofit. And so for that money to several times over the course of a few years, be deployed, get through a retrofit, create the value that comes from energy savings, both value financially from energy savings, but also the climate benefit from reduced GHGs that come, and then have that become a commercial, the gap is gone, the need for the CIB is gone, and the money goes back into the next project. Long answer to a wonderful question.
Thank you, Ehren. So we have a very engaged crowd today. On a une audience bien animée aujourd'hui.
I'll make my answers quicker.
We're receiving a lot of questions, and I would want to make note for everyone that if you submitted a question today that was not answered during this meeting, you'll receive a response by email, and we will also be posting a consolidated version of all Q&As as well as a recording of this annual public meeting on our website. Donc, si vous nous avez soumis une question aujourd'hui qui n'a pas été répondue lors de cette audience, nous allons faire en sorte d'avoir un résumé de toutes les questions sur notre site web avec la version vidéo de notre Assemblée publique annuelle. Moving on, let's talk about a question with respect to smaller projects. So how can smaller projects, we're talking about a project that would be less than $50 million in total capital, get support from the CIB for clean energy projects that support the energy transition? And before you answer that question, Ehren, we've received a lot of questions as well in terms of members of the audience wanting to get in contact with the CIB, wanting to get in contact with our investments team. What I will say with that respect, on our website, really the first portal to get in contact with us, we have a direct email address, and that's investments@cib-bic.ca. Those emails get sourced directly by our investments team, and we will get in touch with you as soon as possible. Donc, si vous voulez communiquer avec la banque, surtout par rapport à des projets d'investissement, veuillez nous contacter sur notre site web. On a une adresse spéciale qui est investissement à commercial cib-bic.ca, puis ça va faire notre plaisir de vous répondre.
I also receive frequent messages on LinkedIn and to my email saying we're interested in blank, and we answer them all. So we are very reachable. On the question of smaller projects, well, my last answer started down this path. Actually, there are a few ways. Now, look, I think it's important to start and say the CIB. We are a tool in a much broader toolkit of infrastructure delivery across our country. And we aren't designed to solve all problems. And it's important to know what you're good at and also know what you're not good at as an organization. And so I start by saying, I just give you an example on electric vehicle charging. Let's pick an example. The CIB has really designed a solution that's around ex-urban, suburban chargers, level 3 high-speed chargers, that have an economic story to them that actually I think over the fullness of time will be profitable, but have that commercial gap in the early years of the uncertainty of who will use the chargers, et cetera. So that's what the CIB is designed to target. And we are working incredibly closely with colleagues at Ehren in that case to think about the full charger landscape. And putting the first charger in my hometown in Northern Ontario is probably not a CIB investable project because the traffic demand in the near term at least will not be enough to create repayment of a loan. So that's the kind of project that maybe a grant is better designed for. So when I say we're a tool in the toolkit, what I mean is we look at each of our markets. In my example, electric vehicles, but I would say the same thing about clean power, where we partner with colleagues and programs like SREPs. I think of industrial investments, where we partner with people like SIF, where we are part of a spectrum. And I think it's really important to note that. That said, we are the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and we do think hard about how we can be relevant across the country, and that's an important part of our mandate. My last answer started down the path of one way we serve smaller projects, that is through aggregation. So whereas I can lend to Avenue Living or Dream to do a bunch of buildings, an individual building owner probably doesn't meet that scale, but they can certainly access our capital through doing a project with Johnson Controls or Amoresco or Sofiac in Quebec or any of our partners on the aggregator side. So that's one way we can do smaller projects. A different way, in northern, remote, and indigenous communities, we have explicitly designed investments to a much smaller scale because that's the only scale we can be relevant. We've got a separate team at the CIB, an incredible team. If you can still see your slides, 2 of them are on screen in the picture. We've got a team that's working in direct partnership with Indigenous communities to do projects at that scale. So our smallest investment is a $6.4 million wastewater treatment facility with an Indigenous community in British Columbia. That's very different than the REM project in Montreal at over $1 billion loan from the CIB. So that's a second way. We have designed a set of bespoke products. The third way is that we are constantly looking for other kinds of aggregations. So for instance, just to use an example that's very relevant, if there was a renewables program where a developer said, we're going to do small-scale solar in a number of communities, none of them meet the size of a CIB loan, but in aggregate they would, then again, we would do a credit facility, think like a revolving credit facility to that borrower, so they could do a series of projects under standard terms. So aggregation, standardization, and scalability in our Indigenous community infrastructure program, those are 3 ways that we're trying to reach smaller communities.
I believe we're at the top of the hour, and that's all the time that we have for questions today. As I said earlier, if you have submitted questions, and we've received a number of really good ones that were not answered during this meeting, we will share all questions and responses on our website. We invite you to visit our website at cib-bic.ca. There's great information about our project partnerships as well as our policies and other decision-making instruments. Nous vous remercions d'avoir assisté à l'Assemblée publique annuelle de la Banque de l'Infrastructure du Canada. Votre intérêt et votre participation sont très appréciés. Thank you for attending the CIB's annual public meeting. We appreciate your interest and participation. Thank you very much, Ehren and Tamara, for participating today, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Merci Frédéric, merci tout le monde.